I had access to a Morgan Stanley web seminar designed to talk about US policy, global tensions, and everything that's been happening with the big, beautiful bill and how it's going to impact investors and how it's going to impact the US consumer and just the lay of the geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. And I want to share this with you. Now, before we get into it, I just want to say that this is private institutional knowledge. This web seminar was not open to the public. It was not open to the media. This is information from a powerful financial institution that they were giving to their shareholders, their clients, their customers, essentially, right? So this in itself represents an informational asymmetry that we have to work against, right? Because I have this knowledge and I'm a privileged tech worker. I hold equities, others out there, maybe you listening to this, don't have access to this sort of information. So I wanted to get this information to you. So of course I can't just drop the entire, playlist, the entire webinar recording. There are copyright and intellectual property concerns. But what I can do is use artificial intelligence to generate a summary of the key points of that webinar discussion. And I want to get into that. So it covered a lot. It covered policy, the big beautiful bill, stable coins, the 2026 fiscal federal budget, immigration, and stable coins. Now, I have the notes here. Rather than just run through and just sort of list at a high level everything that's going on, I want to focus on one key aspect, which is tariffs. And I will actually link in the description below the entire summary. You can look at it yourself. You can ask questions. You can do your own research. But I don't want to just spray and pray all the concepts and all the nuggets of information in here. Instead, what I want to do is key in on these tariffs. And what I really want to focus on is a more insidious aspect of these tariffs, right? We all know that tariffs are inflationary because the cost is passed to the consumer, right? You tariff car imports. The U.S. end consumer will eventually pay a higher price for cars, right? But it goes for any commodity or import, energy or steel, right? Any inputs in a complex value chain, right, that are tariffed, hit the end consumer if companies have pricing power, which they do, right? So that's one thing to be aware of. And I think we are all clear on that. But I think there's this broader question of why this administration is pursuing tariffs so aggressively. And make no mistake about it, according to what I just heard from, top tier policy and legal analysts at Morgan Stanley, these tariffs are slated to bring in $400 billion in revenue just this year, right? Part of what these tariffs are doing are offsetting the continuation of tax cuts that are now being written into our tax laws to be permanent going forward. There were tax provisions, tax cuts that were temporary and set to expire. Now they are going to be written in as the permanent tax structure, sort of consolidating these advantages. Okay, again, we're all aware of that. There's a broader question though. Okay, that's one thing. We know that there's a need to increase revenues. We know that we have a massive federal deficit, right? This bill, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, is projected to add $3.5 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years, right? In addition to that, there will be cuts to Medicaid, right? And a whole host of austerity measures which really degrade social safety nets, SNAP benefits, after school programs, like free and reduced lunch programs. These are the things that are being stripped away, right? At the same time that these massive tariffs are being rolled out to essentially degrade the standard of living and increase the cost of living that the American consumer, the working class, the middle class, the underclass, that they experience. So again, we all know this. I'm giving you old hat. But there's a deeper question, which is like, why is this happening now? And this is actually a broader question of geopolitics and geoeconomics. And so I'm going to try to bring these elements together to provide more clarity on this. So a number of things have happened in the past 2 decades, let's say. For example, the United States has spent trillions of dollars attempting to intervene in the Middle East, and there is still no stability there. We have seen the economic resurgence of a very powerful and disciplined China. We have seen the reemergence of Russia. We have seen the weakening, right, of critical sectors in the US economy. For example, manufacture and resource extraction and rare earth mineral refinement. A lot of these sort of heavy industry supply chains have been outsourced, and now they're, being maintained in, say, a China or a Taiwan or a Ukraine, right? And this is all important because it has made the United States' position in the world geopolitically much more tenuous and contended, essentially, right? Think about it. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States enjoyed, for a period of time, about 25 to 30 years, maybe, a period of unchecked global hegemony in which it was able to set the rules, right? Unquestionable soft power, right? Culturally, financially, economically, militarily, politically, technologically, right? So that gave the United States tremendous leverage in orchestrating the structure of the world, the patterns of trade, right? Financial agreements, right? Really gave the United States the power to set the terms of the chessboard. And what we've seen now, what we're seeing now is the disintegration or the degradation of that power, of that asymmetry in power, right? We have seen that the United States cannot stop a vicious war of attrition on the European continent. We have seen that technological disruption by China can rattle US equities and eliminate billions of dollars of valuation in the Magnificent Seven, for example, right? So what we're seeing is a loss in status and positioning from the United States, by the United States. And what we're seeing is a return to a more thoroughgoingly multipolar world. When I say multipolar world, what I mean is that there are different poles, right? Different poles of political, financial, technological power and innovation, right? It's kind of like a network. There are multiple nodes on this network, and these nodes used to pale in comparison to Washington and Silicon Valley, but no longer is that the case. Even the rapid penetration of K-pop into the U.S. Public sphere, right, the media domain, attests to these shifting geopolitical and cultural balances of power. Now, faced with the loss of that status, faced with the loss of global hegemony, faced with the prospect of de-dollarization, the loss of reserve currency status, the ascendancy of China, the militaristic ambitions of Russia, the rise of BRICS nations and trading blocs that can circumvent unilateral US sanctions, right? That presents a tremendous challenge to a power structure that we know is viciously patriarchal, racist, white, colonial in origin. And I don't personally, again, this is not speaking like to the facts just yet, but I don't personally believe that there is a psychology, an institutional psychology, an institutional psychology that is flexible enough and responsive and dynamic enough to the world to handle that reality, which is crashing in on us. And the poorer you are, the more vulnerable and dispossessed you are, the more you feel this. But if you're wealthy, you don't feel it, but you see it because you have information, right? Just like I was talking earlier about being privy to this Morgan Stanley webinar. Well, that's a very low level of informational asymmetry. You can imagine what people higher up in the socioeconomic scheme are able to see and what they know. Now, all this gets to the main point, which is the United States is losing leverage. And so what that means is they're no longer able to call the shots internationally. They cannot tell Canada to be more involved in policing and preventing the flow of fentanyl into the United States. They cannot tell Mexico to be tougher on immigration. They cannot tell Latin American countries to accept deportees. They cannot tell the EU or NATO to increase their annual defense spending in response to Russian aggression and other strategic security issues in that part of the world. So hopefully I'm coming across, like, there was a time when the United States could, like, say, go do as we say, and these companies had no wherewithal to resist that for the most part. Obviously, that's slightly hyperbolic, but you get the picture. That is no longer the case today. And so what the Trump administration is doing is they are using you, your standard of living, right, your quality of life, as a bargaining chip in these geopolitical games. And that's what these tariffs are really about. What the administration has basically decided is that they are willing to incur marginal decreases in your standard of living from the increase in prices as a result of inflationary tariffing, universal tariffs, right? They're willing to see you be poorer, less healthy, more anxious, more exhausted, less integrated with your community, less civically engaged, right? They are willing to see that happen to you if it means that they can maintain a bargaining chip that allows them to position themselves in such a way as to drive policy in other countries. It is austerity to the core. It is the gutting of social safety nets like Medicaid, and placing the financial responsibility of those programs onto states, right, with varied outcomes, because states, it's a federal system. Alabama, Arkansas, New York, California, Chicago, these are different countries anywhere else in the world, right? So you can sort of understand that the burden of this transition from US unipolarity to genuine multipolarity is being placed on the backs of the underclass, the working class, the middle class, because the ruling elites will not take a loss. They are not going to lose out on billions or trillions of dollars of wealth over the coming years to do what? in their mind, drag along hundreds of millions of dependent, useless people. They don't think that way. I'm sorry. So I don't want to harp on the negatives of this, but this is what's happening, and you need to be aware of this. I do not have some political prescription. I don't even know what to tell you to do about this, but you need to be aware of this, right? Every so often I log onto YouTube, not in my personal account, just like, from an anonymous browser, and I see what's recommended. Like, this is not what's recommended. This information needs to get out there. You need to listen to this. It's important. You may not feel it now. And that's another point that they stressed in the webinar, which is like the effects of tariffs, the effect of this new trade regime will not be felt for potentially years. Yeah, you may not feel it in 2025, but in 2026, 2027, 2028, maybe even after Donald Trump leaves office, right? That's when the true effects of this are going to be felt. And they're going to be borne by you, because these companies have pricing power. They're not going to take a loss. They're going to transfer that cost to the consumer. So your electronics, your appliances, your furniture, your vehicles are all going to be more expensive. Your food is going to be more expensive. Your medicine is going to be more expensive and less subsidized by the government in aggregate. That's what we're looking at. That's what austerity plus wealth extraction looks like. And so again, I'm very passionate about this because I see these things. I see them playing out. And I don't want you to be caught off guard by this. And just being armed with this knowledge is important. And so, like I said, here are the notes. I printed them out just so I could reference them if need be. But I'm going to link these in the description. Take a look at them. Like, share, comment, and maybe drop in the comments a key point that you saw from this, or any general point of discussion about the current state of geopolitics, geoeconomics, American policy, and just what it means for you living through this. I think that's a good discussion point. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you got something from it. Like, share, subscribe, comment, summary in the description below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.